Thanks for joining us on the tour of McGowan Hall. I'm Robert Newport, and I hope you learned a thing or two about the Knights of Columbus and McGowan Hall. To rent the building or donate to preserve a piece of history, you can visit us, check us out at mcgowanhall.org.
What would you like to say to the board for all their efforts in assisting you in what you have to do for the building and what they have to do for all the time they've spent over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for your service. You guys know I love this place right there along with you. It is a special, special place. So thank you very much for your time, all your tireless hours that you've put into it. Thank you for supporting me, backing me up. There have been a lot of tough years, the flood of 2016, going through the pandemic. We've been through some rough times, but looking back, I will always honor and treasure those memories of the blood, sweat, and tears, hand in hand with my brothers, keeping this place going, which is really a stronghold for the faith and a stronghold for brotherhood and fraternity. And it was an honor to do it right there with you guys. And I thank you for the opportunity. I thank you for your time and service. It's the most worthy of efforts, and I appreciate doing it with you guys. Yeah, and lastly, I am excited about the future. I'm excited about the next generation, the next 100 years. Cheers to the next 100 years, like we said at the 100th anniversary. And thank you for carrying on, right? I'm confident in the people we have in place to take it even further.
So, Robert, you've been here in the building for quite some time.
I've always been here, Sean.
And everybody loves that classic Jack Nicholson movie, The Shining.
Of course.
And you standing behind the bar kind of is reminiscent of that. Now, number one, do you have any idea how old the bar is?
The bar, gosh, about 80 years old, right, from the 1940s. This came out of Ike and Jonesy's downtown. Of course, some of you may remember the large Marilyn Monroe billboard out front. They did close down several years ago. It was in another bar before that in the 1940s. Rick Eichholz generously donated it to us. We had to split it up. The whole thing was 26 feet wide. So some of it's downstairs, most of it's up here.
All right, so we're going to go around the building and essentially document historic items on the wall and old stories of things that have happened here in the building.
Sounds great.
So the wall behind you actually has blocked off windows. When were they originally blocked off?
1960s. All the windows in the building were completely blocked in the 1960s. And you can see kind of the insets or the faint rectangular outline of the windows. They're 20 feet high. They're all still there. The steel frame and glass windows are.
So what would be a future goal?
Yeah, for the future, it's really just a matter of time and money. People ask, are you going to restore those? Are you going to write us a check for, $100,000, probably more. Anyway, we can do several windows at once. We did just do a dozen windows, casement windows, on the front face of the building. But really, we have had some generous donations. The state of Indiana has stepped up with some grant awards. And this place really belongs to the community. It is a community center. And if someone did step up with a donation, we would love to transform the building.
So here's actually a shot of the hall itself with the windows and everybody having a nice time. And when do you think that photograph was taken of everybody dancing?
Oh gosh, the bottom one was around 2015. But yeah, everybody dressed up like the 1920s. We threw a 1920s themed dance to celebrate the history of the building.
So here's an old black and white. When do you think this was taken?
Again, right around 1922, after the building was built. And you see all the windows opened up as it was intended.
And then this bottom rendition is essentially what it would be like if they were opened up again as a goal? Is that
exactly. There's no new construction there. There's no new plans. That would just be if all the 93 windows were reopened again. Yeah, and here we have a picture of a servicemen dance from 1943. And I've had many baby boomers knock on the door and ask me, oh my gosh, I'm glad you were here. Can you show me the place where mom and dad met before the war? Dad was in the Army or in the Marines, and he shipped out to fight the Japanese or in the European theater. And amazing stories, that they went on 2 or 3 dates and mom waited for dad, and dad came back, and they got married and had 8 or 9 kids. So yeah, this was one of those dances that they used to throw here quite a bit during World War II. Yeah, this is an article written by Connie Ziegler back in 2016 in the Urban Times. And there's a very proud history of the Knights of Columbus battling against bigotry and hatred. Specifically in the 1920s, it was the KKK, right? And there's kind of an amazing stories of a lot of knights from this council and parishioners from the cathedral banding arms together around the cathedral when they got word that the knights were actually going to try to harm the priest and burn the church down. And other than that, just fighting slander against the Catholic Church, against minority groups. The Knights really stood firm, stood strong against that hatred, which unfortunately was pretty rampant in the 1920s in Indianapolis. Okay, what we have here is a solid bronze bas-relief of Hugh McGowan. And this was in the traction terminal that Hugh McGowan built. He was president of the Traction Terminal Company, light rail network, interurban trains that went throughout the Midwest. And that was the largest interurban terminal in the world at its time. And this stood after his death as a memorial. And the family called me several years ago and said, "We have this bronze sculpture. Do you want it?" Like, hell yeah, I want it. So I went to the house. It was in their shed, kind of behind some garden tools, and for a while, it took us a while to hang this thing up. It's pretty heavy, as you can imagine. And we would buy people a beer if they were able to lift it over their head. And yes, I was able to lift it over my head to show that it could be done. But I think this is a much better place for it, mounted on the wall. As people come into the Grand Hall, this is the first thing they see. Yeah, here we have the emblem, the logo, the crest of the Knights of Columbus. It's been around since 1882 when the Knights was founded. And we had that in storage and thought it would look a lot better hung up in the doorway. Here, this podium or this table is very historic. It's at least 100 years old that we know of. It was actually in the building dedication newspaper article in the Indianapolis Star in 1922. So we know it's at least 100 years old. We're going to keep that one around. And here we have another table here, very historic. And this says, D of I. There's a crown and a cross on this, and that stands for Daughters of Isabella. That was the ladies' auxiliary of the Knights of Columbus, and they were very active in Indianapolis. They had a thrift store, and they raised enough money to build the St. Elizabeth Coleman home. And there was a woman, actually, we did some haunted tours a couple of years ago, and I was telling the story of the Daughters of Isabella, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I was practically raised in the St. Elizabeth Coleman home. They helped out me and my mother." And she didn't realize there was a connection between the Daughters of Isabella and the Knights of Columbus. So it was kind of cool to see that come full circle. So these doors right here at one time used to walk into the McGowan Mansion. And now they walk into a concrete block wall. The McGowan Mansion is no longer there. But until 1963, when they tore the mansion down, these used to walk right into the home. Now I'm going to tell you a little story. So back in the day, there was a lot of bingo games here at the hall, and there was a mother and a son. They were kind of cleaning up afterwards. They were walking this direction in the Grand Hall, and they both stopped in their tracks about halfway across the floor, and they looked at each other, and they said, "Did you see what I just saw?" And she said to the son, "Did you see what I just saw?" He said, "Well, Mom, I just saw a couple dressed from a different era, maybe the 1930s or 40s, walk hand in hand right through that old doorway." And the mother looked at the son and she said, "That's exactly what I saw." Who knows, walking into the mansion to go back to the restaurant that used to be there. I don't know. We've had several contractors talk about taps on the shoulders when they're up in the balcony working on something, or brushes across the arm, or I myself have heard people talking, and hey, other people heard it too. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just voices in my head downstairs late at night. So yeah, there are kind of some strange things going on in the building every now and then.
And after a decade of you being in the building, I'm sure you've had your moments when you might have heard some bumps in the night too.
That is true. Some noises upstairs at 3 a.m. I know I shut all the lights off and closed all the doors, locked everything up. And I'll be down in the office working, and there will be footsteps, and I'll come up with a baseball bat because I know I locked everything up. And all the lights are on, radios are playing strange things, and all the doors are still locked. We checked the cameras, nobody got in. So yeah, there's some funny things that have happened here, no doubt about it.
All right, so let's go check out your beautiful antique bar in the basement and the memorabilia. That's the history that everybody should know.
Let's do it. The lounge is a cool spot.
So here we have the bar and lounge area, and I know I've enjoyed times here with music and different things, and people just basically getting along and telling stories. Why don't you give us a little backstory of the bar and the lounge?
Oh, of course. So when the building was built in the 1920s, the bar and the lounge was in the mansion. So it really didn't become the bar and lounge until the 1960s when they reconfigured this building to accommodate their needs. So when the building was built, this was a locker room and smoking rooms and a billiard room. And what is now the kitchen was actually a shower room. And you can still see the tile floor and where the shower heads used to be with the outlines, and the water pipes are still there. So it's gone through a lot of changes, but ever since the 60s, it's been our lounge, and we host jazz nights every first Friday, open to the public, and salsa Fridays every third Friday of the month, open to the public. And we have some rehearsals going on right now. You may have heard that.
So Robert, what is this historic photograph?
Absolutely. This is very cool. This is actually a Supreme Convention of the Knights of Columbus, so a worldwide convention. They came here in 1940, and towards the right, you can see the ginkgo tree over here that we looked at earlier. And in the front, you have who became a cardinal, Cardinal Joseph Ritter. And he was back then Father Ritter. He was a chaplain here. And he's famous for integrating the Catholic school system in Indianapolis. He was, I believe, the first to do that. Caught a lot of flack for it, but he just said, hey, you got a problem with it, I can just excommunicate you. He was a member here.
So here we have an antique jukebox. So why don't you give us an idea of how this was acquired here and maybe how old it is?
Oh, this is an early 1970s AMI jukebox. It's been here kind of relatively recently. David Proctor's one of our members. His father-in-law fixed it up. He's an electrical engineer. So restored it for us, got it working for us, and it's just been, people get a kick out of it. It's a lot of fun.
So does it still work?
It still works. It still works.
Why don't you play a track?
We let people put money in it, but it is free, so. Actually plays the 45s, the old records,
Oh boy.
Oh yeah. My personal favorites. Good, the bad, the ugly. Isn't that the story of McGowan Hall? So here we are in the lounge. I've heard many stories that a lot of federal agents would come down here. One of the federal buildings used to be over in Pennsylvania. I think they enjoyed the semi-private nature of the lounge down here, and they had many a backroom conversation, if you will. But it has really we've enjoyed a resurgence in the neighborhood. Our first Friday jazz night, after party as we call it, starts about 9 o'clock every first Friday of the month, has been really popular. We fill the room every month, and it's just been a really fun, organic, word-of-mouth crowd to come see Christopher Pitts and his jazz trio every first Friday. And Jacob Smith has started a salsa night every third Friday of the month. So we at least do every first and third Friday. Of course, go to McGowanHall.org if you'd like to stay up to date on other current events happening at the building. So here's a plaque that we dug up in the basement of the building, just sitting in storage. And it's like, we need to get this hung up. It's dedicated to the service of members here at the council who gave their lives in World Wars I, II, and Korea. And at the top of the list here is Father Thomas Cecina. You may recognize that name in Indianapolis, Cecina High School. And his story is, if you don't know it, you need to know it. He was an Army chaplain in World War II, got taken prisoner by the Japanese, was being transported to mainland Japan as a POW. And he was repeatedly tortured for spreading the gospel to the American GIs. Sadly, the ship was sunk, and he was last seen giving absolution to his fellow soldiers as the ship went down. He perished in the shipwreck, but there were several soldiers that lived on to tell the story, and he was a member here.
Great.
Okay, and here we have the McGowan Mansion. It is a beautiful home. Sadly, it was torn down in the 1960s. It wasn't my idea, right? It is a huge architectural loss, yes, but there really wasn't the emphasis on historic preservation that we have now. It was before the National Registry of Historic Places, before Indianapolis Historic Preservation Commission. So sadly, it was kind of a lesson that, hey, we need to preserve these beautiful old historic buildings. But when this building was connected to the McGowan Mansion, they had to share a load-bearing wall. And when we did some roof renovations a couple of years ago, we had to tear into where those two buildings joined. The mansion wall, the load-bearing wall, is actually still there, that 1870s wall. The joists of this building were built into it. And I was able to recover a decorative piece of limestone that was loose. And so we have a few of these from the mansion that are part of history, part of that 1870s mansion. Over here, we have another convention here at the building. And again, the ginkgo tree is a reference point that is still there in the garden. Here we have just another angle of the mansion with the neon sign, "In God We Trust," KFC out front. And this is actually a 4th degree exemplification, which is the highest degree that you can obtain in the Knights of Columbus. Okay, and here we have the original charter of our council, the modern day Council 437 Knights of Columbus, chartered in 1899. This is the original charter hanging above the fireplace. And over here we have an album from the Columbians, which is a singing male chorus. Oftentimes they sang in Latin at a lot of high masses here around town. But this was a group, they also performed triad concerts with the Manor Corps, the German singing group, and the Masons singing group as well. And they'd have big concerts at the Marat downtown. And we actually have one of these white jackets here at the hall. You may see one of us wearing it every now and then for fun. It has a patch, Columbians, and a KFC emblem on it. And then here we have a golf trophy from the 1920s. Kind of a cool Art Deco design. And it looks like Dr. H. Gick in 1934 was the big golf champion. Congratulations, Dr. Gick. Okay, and here we have another state convention. This is the 1941 Knights of Columbus State Convention that was held here again. You can see the mansion, and over here, the front steps of our building, bearing again the ginkgo tree for reference. You've got the Windsor Apartments across the street there on 13th. And they weren't there in 1940, and they are there in 1941, so that pretty much pinpoints when they built it. But when they designed our building, it's very reminiscent of the Athenaeum Ballroom upstairs, where they do a lot of stage productions. Probably because for many years, for their larger events, the council here had plays and productions and fundraisers in the Athenaeum. So you can see the reminiscence, if you will, of the two ballrooms. Yeah, McGowan Hall was built in 1922. Of course, the Knights of Columbus, Council 437, raised all the money to do it. They hired Cuff and Deary architectural firm. They were formerly Cuff and Wooling, later Cuff and Deary, but they designed Shortridge High School, the Buick building on Meridian, which is, I think, the Hoosier Lotto building now. They designed and built what is now Simon Brute Seminary, that beautiful castle-looking structure out on Cold Spring Road that used to be the convent. And the Swine building on the State Fairgrounds, and a couple other State Fairground buildings, just to name a few. So up here in the lounge, you have some really cool old pennants, Empire State Building, different cities across the country. And not a crazy historical story here. My buddy was getting rid of these. I was just going to throw them out. And man, you can't do that. These would look great in the lounge. These are all from the 1930s and 40s. Kind of some neat historic pennants. Okay, here we have a poster. It's actually from World War I. It is a recreation, right? But this was a war bond poster. The Knights of Columbus were super involved in efforts in World War I to raise money for the fighting effort. And they had a lot of hospitality tents overseas. We have a book here in the hall where a lot of our members that were serving would write letters back home, just talking about the experience, talked about the Spanish flu when that was going through the tents or the camps in World War I. So you have a priest here, and he's looking upwards towards God. And you have all the soldiers with their bayonets kneeling down in worship and thanksgiving, and maybe making an appeal to the Lord. You have some battleships in the background and some fire here. So kind of an intense poster. But what is cut off is buy war bonds. It used to be at the bottom of the poster. Okay, here we have a papal blessing from Saint Pope John Paul II. This is from 1989 on the occasion of the Council's 90th anniversary. So pretty cool. Got this from the Vatican. Pope John Paul just blessing the building, blessing the Knights of Columbus Council. Okay, here we have an article from the Indianapolis Star in 1963. It's the passing of a social mecca, talking about the unfortunate demolition of the McGowan mansion. So it talks about Hugh McGowan a bit and the different architectural elements of the home that were so sadly lost in 1963. Yeah, here we have a picture of some Knights back in the 60s. They're dedicating a plaque in the federal courthouse building downtown saying, "In God we trust." It's still there. And here we have a mass kit that was found in the building. Oftentimes, a relative of the priest, when he would become a priest, would purchase silver chalice, and you have the ciborium to the left. And here we have an award from the Supreme Council of the Knights of Columbus to our council in 1941 and 1942 for excellence in programming, charitable programs of the Knights of Columbus. All right, here we have our past Grand Knights. The Grand Knights are the leader of the Knights of Columbus Council, elected by their peers every 2 years. We have the first one going all the way to the back, Mr. Edward O'Reilly, past Grand Knight. The crosses signify that they have passed away. It looks like a couple have fallen off. We need to get those back on there. We have Joseph McGowan. Where is Joseph? There he is. And he was the cousin of Hugh McGowan, who lived in the mansion. Joseph took over the Traction Terminal Company after Hugh McGowan passed away. It was largely responsible for the fundraising of the funds to build McGowan Hall. And with the family connection, was able to convince Kate, Hugh McGowan's wife, to sell the mansion to the Knights of Columbus. So Joseph was very instrumental in the Knights coming here to 13th and Delaware in Indianapolis.
And who is the current Grand Knight?
Yes, the current Grand Knight is Brian Graben, retired IMPD detective. I'm a past Grand Knight, and we have, I can't tell you how many off the top of my head, but there's a long line of us going back to 1899.
So these gentlemen were the Grand Knights for the Knights of Columbus.
No, they are members. Yeah, so we have a beautiful painting of Hugh McGowan here, painted by August Binziger. And he has actually painted popes, presidents, princes. He's got work hanging in the Smithsonian. So the guy's legit. But kind of an interesting story how we acquired the painting. My sister had her wedding invitations printed at a particular business, and she went to pick them up, and she said, "They got this huge painting of Hugh McGowan. I wonder if it's the same Hugh McGowan as your Hugh McGowan." I'm like, well, yeah, it is. But went up there and talked to the owner of the company. It is at an old interurban stop, an old light rail train stop up there in Noblesville. And that's kind of how they got the connection to the Indiana Transportation Museum, and that's how they acquired the painting. But long story, slightly less long, I asked the owner of the printing company if they would donate the painting to us, and he generously agreed to do that. And that is how we acquired, went up there with brother Daniel McKenzie, who was on the building board, and we put it in the U-Haul and brought it down to McGowan Hall. I feel like he's home, but this hung in the boardroom of the Traction Terminal that was torn down and is the Hilton Hotel now at Illinois and Market Streets. And here we are in the council room. Of course, Jesus is keeping watch. The council room, as you might imagine, had council meetings. And back in the day when it was built, a couple hundred guys would cram in here, and they would have elections and make important council decisions. And probably many a heated argument, I would imagine, in this room, but also a lot of great charitable work and the planning thereof was conducted here in the council room. And we're now in the game room. We have our 1960s era Brunswick Viscount pool table over there. And that's a 9-footer. So you play on that, you get real good. You know, you go into the main bars and it's like a micro table. You're like a world beater. But we just did some renovations in here, had the floor redone and repainted and put some new lighting in, and it really spruced it up. I don't know if you can see, Sean, the doors behind you actually did come out of the mansion. So those are 1870s era mansion doors that they salvaged many years ago.
So what type of groups would utilize this room?
You know, really, this is kind of a members only group. So if you want kind of an exclusive room when you join the Knights, this is your spot to come and enjoy yourself. It is located right off the lounge. I've had a lot of great times in this room over the years. Some of my fondest memories are beating Connor James, a fellow board member, many, many times at pool, and anyone else that I play as well. Now in the old boiler room, which we affectionately call the dungeon. And one thing I thought was interesting, if you see here, you have this red brick. Everything else in the building is poured concrete, steel reinforced concrete. I always kind of wondered, why is that entire wall? So found some old Sanborn fire insurance maps. And this is actually where this building connected with the carriage house. And they had to leave that one wall even after they tore the carriage house down, because the load-bearing steel joists of this building go right into that wall. So that's an 1870s carriage house wall that has been conflated into our 1922 steel and concrete foundation, McGowan Hall.
Go.
Okay, we're here in the northwest corner of the building, right outside the lower level men's room. And this is kind of a utility closet, or it has become that anyway. And what you see here is we're in the basement. This doorway used to walk right into the mansion basement. Of course, it's all sealed off now, just dirt and poured concrete. But again, the 1870s mansion brick here, because our building was built directly into it. And thank you for joining us on this tour of McGowan Hall. We hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about the Knights and McGowan Hall. And if you would like to rent the hall out for your next big event, you can go to McGowanHall.org. And if you would like to donate and support what we're doing, preserving the history, preserving these traditional values here at the hall, also check us out at McGowanHall.org.